Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome once again to the Undiscovered Games video podcast, where we take a look at the lesser known board games of the world and share those with you. For episode 9, we're going to look at a very mean and cutthroat worker placement filler game. And I'm not a German language expert, but I believe this is called KRONEN FUR DEN KONIG, which translates to Crowns for the King. This was designed by Brian Yu back in 2013 with beautiful artwork by the great Michael Menzel. He's one of the best in the business, and his art is what attracted me to this game originally. It's a worker placement style game designed for 3 to 4 players, however it's best with 4, I will say. Very easy to learn and teach this one, but it is a very mean and cutthroat game. I will warn you right now, this is a racing game, so it's a very mean, get out of my way type of game. You can steal, you can knock people off of spots, so it's not going to be for everybody, but I wanted to make a video about it so you can judge for yourself, because there's just not that much content about this game online. Now, as we look in the box, once again, we see this beautiful artwork. Now, I have the German edition of the game, so my rule book is all in German. Now, I'm doing a direct translation of these German rules in this video. There's a little bit of dispute online about that, but I'm going to stick to the original German rules. Now, these player screens have a nice little illustration on the back with each player color represented, which is a nice touch. Those serve their purpose very nicely. We have these chunky big wooden pawns here, these worker pieces. I love these pieces. They're big, they're bold, they're easy to tell apart on the board, and just very nicely made wooden components. I like those. Here we have a big giant deck of money cards. Now, these money cards are fine except for the 3s. The 3s look like 5s at a glance. You just have to remember the cards do not go up to 5. They go 1 through 4. I just wish the 3 looked a little more like a 3. Next, we have our crowns, which we are racing to collect. Your standard cardboard tokens, those work just fine. And last, we have the jewels, which are very cool. These little blue plastic jewels add a nice little visual flavor to the game. I like how those look. The board looks really nice on the table when it's all laid out. I love the illustrations. I just wish there wasn't so much text on these worker spots. I wish they would have used some more icons or symbols just to cut down on the words. And again, I have the German edition, so I had to print off some overlays to put on the board, which I will show you later. To set up the game, we're going to make a supply of jewels and crowns within easy reach of all the players. We like to put them on the board just to make it look nice. Each player is going to get a player screen. This is where you're going to hide your crowns throughout the game. And again, the player screens have the matching player colors on them. Each player has 2 worker pawns. These start the game in the tavern here, so place all the pawns in the tavern to start the game. Next, you're going to give 2 jewels to each player. The jewels are kept in front of your screen. This is not hidden behind your screen. Always keep your jewels visible because you can steal them from each other. Next, you're going to shuffle up this deck of money cards, and then you're going to deal 4 cards to each player to start the game. And 4 is pretty much going to be your hand size throughout the game, with a few exceptions, but at the end of your turn, you're always going to draw back up to 4 cards. Then place that deck of cards next to the board, and you're pretty much ready to play the game. The goal of this game is to be the first player to collect 10 crowns. And to do this, you're going to be sending your workers out to hire these artisans to help you get these crowns. Now, if you notice on each of these spots, there's a number at the top. That's how much gold you have to spend to go there. And you spend golds by playing cards from your hand. Now, let's go over each spot individually. Now, again, I printed off these English overlays so we can learn what these locations do. This here is the pickpocket. It can hold 3 workers. That's what the circles mean. That can be you or other players. It doesn't matter. And that lets you take 1 jewel from the supply or from another player, so you can steal. And that costs 1 or 2 gold to go there. Here we have the miner. This can hold 2 workers, and this will cost you 3 gold to send your worker there. Again, the gold comes from your cards, which I will explain in a minute. This lets you take 2 jewels from the supply. Pretty easy. Next up, we have the alchemist here, and the alchemist is going to cost 4 gold, once again from your cards, and the alchemist lets you exchange 3 gems for 1 crown. And once again, those 2 circles just mean that you can only have 2 workers on that spot at any given time. Next up is the blacksmith that costs 5 gold to go there, and that just gives you 1 free crown from the supply. So that's one way to get crowns in this game, is the blacksmith. Next, we're going to look at the silversmith, which costs 6 gold and gives you 1 crown and 2 jewels. However, this is what's called an elite artisan. If you look on the board, there's these fancy blue borders on the side here. So number 6, 7, 8, and 9, you use those spots once and then your worker has to go back to the tavern. So it's like a one-time use. The tavern also has that fancy blue border to help you remember this. You just use it once and then it goes back. And I added this little arrow here to help you remember that. But basically these elite artisans only have room for 1 worker and they go back to the tavern immediately. Now the other locations, your workers actually stay put until you move them or until someone else bumps you off. So keep that in mind when you're deciding where to go. Now the thief here says take up to 4 jewels from a single source, either the supply or another player. And again, this costs 7 gold to go there and there's only room for 1 worker. That's a very mean location. You could steal up to 4 jewels from another player. Next up, we have the wizard here, which costs 8 gold to go there, and this lets you turn 1 jewel into 1 crown up to 4 times. So if you had 4 jewels, you could spend them to get 4 crowns in a single turn. That can be a very powerful location if you have jewels. Finally, we have the goldsmith, which costs 9 gold. Now, it's a little tricky to get to this location because of the way the card play works. Again, I'll explain that in a minute. But this just lets you collect 3 crowns. It's the most powerful spot on the board. But again, it's a one-time use. They would have to go back to the tavern. Now, this top corner of the board explains what you can do with your jewels. Again, you're going to be acquiring jewels. So let's look at my printout here. When you acquire 7 jewels at any time during the game, you must immediately spend them and you get a crown. So it's kind of like a hand limit, but you get a crown out of it. So you just got to remember to do that. Now each turn you can spend 2 jewels to do the following things. You can push another player off of a space. So let's say, red was out on this spot and you wanted to be mean and bump them off. You could pay 2 jewels to do that. And they would just go away back to the tavern and you can take their spot. Even if there's open spots on the board, you can still be a jerk and knock them off. So it says here though, you have to pay 1 of those jewels to that player and then 1 to the bank. So they're going to get something out of it. Another thing you can do is draw 2 more cards. Now again, I haven't explained how the card play works, but basically you're always going to have 4 cards and that'll let you draw 2 extra so you have more options. Now you can also spend 2 jewels to play an extra card. So each turn you're allowed to play 2 cards, but that's going to let you play an extra gold card to access higher numbers or different numbers. Gives you more flexibility. You can do those things on your turn with jewels as much as you can or want to. Now what makes this game interesting and different from other worker placement games is the order in which things happen. So let's just do a sample playthrough so you can see how this works. I think that's the easiest way to learn this. So the first thing you're going to do on your turn is always check the tavern and take all your workers back. So if it's the green player's turn to go first, they're going to take all their green workers back to their supply. You always do that first. The next thing you do before you play your cards is you check the board. If you have any workers out there still from a previous turn, then you would get to collect on those locations. Finally, you get to play money cards to send workers to new locations. And the way this works is you play up to 2 cards from your hand, and you can either combine their values or play them individually. So if I play the 3 and the 4, I could send 1 worker out to the 7 location here, or I could send 2 workers, 1 to the 3 and 1 to the 4. So depending on your goal in the game and where you are, you have to make that decision. So let's just say for the purpose of this example, we go to the 3 and the 4. Now what's interesting is you do not collect on these spots. That's the end of your turn. Your workers have to be there at the start of the next turn to collect on those locations. So you pay the money and then you hope that you're still there next turn. It's kind of interesting. You always draw up to 4 cards at the end of your turn, and then it goes to the next player, which is blue. Again, the first thing you do on your turn is check the tavern, take any workers out of the tavern to your supply. The next thing, you would check the board and collect any benefits of workers that are out there, but since we don't have any, we move on to playing our money cards to place our workers out. And again, you could spend jewels to play extra cards, draw extra cards, and things like that. But let's just say as we look through our hand here, we see these 2 4s, and that looks like a pretty good starting point for our turn. So we're going to play 2 4s, and we're going to access the 8 location up here, which lets us spend jewels for crowns. So we're going to try to get a head start on the race to 10 crowns. Now again, we do not get to use that spot until next turn, so we have to hope that no one bumps us off by paying those jewels. But for now, that's where we're going to go, and we draw 2 cards to end our turn. Again, always end your turn with 4 cards. Now it's the red player's turn. So the first thing, they're going to get all their workers from the tavern back to their supply, and because there's none out on the board, we jump right to playing our money cards again. Now sometimes it's nice to get these lower cards out of your hand, so you could play like 2 1s and send 2 workers to this same location here, and then hope you draw some better cards later. Or you could just combine the 4 and the 1 to jump up to the 5 location. The blacksmith is a pretty good spot, so I think they're going to do that. So red sends 1 worker to the blacksmith in hopes that they're still there at the start of their next turn. Again, draw up to 4 cards, and now it is yellow's turn. First thing, always take all your workers from the tavern back to your supply. And once again, they do not have any workers on the board to collect with, so now they play their money cards. So we have 3 1s and a 2. This is a very low hand, but again, you still have some options here. So they could jump down on the 3 location, or they could just get rid of 2 of their 1 cards and send 2 workers out onto the pickpocket up there, which I think is what they're going to do, and just hope they draw some better cards for next turn. So they're going to play 2 1s and send 2 workers out to the pickpocket. And once again, you always end with 4 cards. So we continue clockwise around the table, and now we're back to the green player again. So now that you've seen the first round play out, this is going to make a little more sense. The first thing the green player does is check the tavern. There's nobody there. Now you look on the board. Any green workers on the board now collect their goodies. So this location down here gives 2 jewels from the supply, and the other location lets you spend 3 jewels to get 1 crown. And they're going to go ahead and spend 3 jewels and get the first crown of the game. Now the crowns stay hidden behind your player's screen. As soon as you get 10 crowns, you say, hey, I have 10, and you win the game. Now these workers here do not move until they get moved. They're not like the elite artisans that have to go back to the tavern. These workers stay put until someone else spends jewels to bump you off, or if you play money cards, you can move them to another location, and that's what you do now. So after you collect, then you look at your money cards and decide if you want to send your workers out. Now here we have 3 3s, which is nice because we could access that 9 location. But remember, you're only allowed to play 2 cards. You'd have to spend 2 jewels to play that 3rd card. So we don't have 2 jewels. Therefore, we're just going to stay put, collect our jewels next turn, and then spend these 3 cards to go up to the 9. Next, it is the blue player's turn, and they're looking at the tavern. Remember, you always look at the tavern first. There's no one there. Second, we look at the board. There's 1 guy out on the board, and this spot lets us now spend 1 jewel to collect 1 crown up to 4 times. We have 2 jewels, we can get 2 crowns just like that. Now remember, this is an elite artisan, so this worker has to immediately go to the tavern, but we still have this worker in our supply that we can now send out by playing cards. So it's very important to wrap your head around the order of operations during your turn. First check the tavern, then check the board, then play your cards and send workers out. So looking at our number combinations, I think the 4 and the 2 is probably our best bet since we only have 1 worker to send out. We can get this worker over here on this 6th location, which is a good spot. And we drew our 4 cards, so now it's the red player's turn. First, you check the tavern, there's nobody there, then we check the board. There's 1 worker on the board, now they get to collect from this worker. They get 1 crown. Now, that worker is not going anywhere. They stay put until someone bumps them off. And we still have 1 more worker now that we get to send out. So looking at our cards, it looks like the 5 or the 6 spot is going to be where we want to go next. Now, if we go to the 6, we would have to pay to bump that blue worker off, and we don't really want to spend gems to do that. So we're going to jump back over to the 5 location and send another worker there. Now, this is where this game gets so interesting because we're forcing the other players to spend jewels now to basically bump us off. And if they don't bump us off, we're going to collect 2 crowns every turn until someone bumps us off. And that would be a very short game. So you have to pay attention to everyone else and where they are. Now it's the yellow player's turn. They're going to first check the tavern and retrieve any of their workers, but now they get to collect on these 2 workers. It's 1 jewel, but they get to do it 2 times. So they take 1 jewel from a single location, but since there's 2 workers there, they get 2 jewels from up to 2 locations. So they're going to steal, and now they're going to decide if they want to send their yellow workers elsewhere. Looking at their hand, they have 3 2s and a 1. Now this might not be the best strategic move. I'm just trying to show you, some examples here. Let's just say they're looking at this 6th location and they want to bump that blue player off. So they have enough jewels to do that. And I think they're going to go ahead and spend 2 jewels to bump the blue player off. And I forgot for the video, you always pay 1 to the player and 1 to the bank. I just forgot to do that in the video. Next, we're going to play our gold cards, and we have to play that extra card by spending 2 more jewels. So we spend that. Now we can play these 3 cards and send one of our workers to this 6th location. And essentially, they just stole that location from the blue player, but it cost them some jewels to do it. Again, we draw up to 4 cards, and then it becomes the green player's turn once again. So green first checks the tavern. There's nobody there. So next they look at their green workers. And now they're going to collect. Now this spot here, they're not going to be able to collect on because they don't have 3 jewels. But they're going to collect their 2 jewels from this spot. And then they're going to look at their gold cards and see if they want to move. And they do. Remember, we have these 3 3s. And now we have jewels to play that 3rd card. So we're going to play the 3 3s. We have to spend 2 jewels to play the 3rd card. And we're going to move this worker up to the 9. Again, the 9 is the best spot on the board, but another player might decide to bump us off before it gets back to us. And that's where this game is extremely cutthroat and mean. So if you don't like those kind of games, you might want to avoid this one. I find this game interesting. Next, it is the blue player's turn. They retrieve all their workers from the tavern. And now they look at their gold cards because they don't have any workers on the board. Looking at their cards, they have a 4, a 3, a 1, and a 3. And maybe they want to keep some of these bigger cards in their hands for a future turn. So let's play the 1 and the 3. So we got 2 workers on the board and we kept some high cards in our hand. Again, I don't know if that's the best strategy. I'm just trying to show you some examples and what you might think about. So red first checks the tavern and now they collect on their workers. Now they have 2 workers here. They're going to get 2 crowns. And they're thinking, how has no one bumped me off of this spot? I'm just going to stay here until someone does. And this game has a lot of agonizing decisions because you have to watch the other players. You have to keep them in check, but you can't do everything. You're limited by your gold cards. You're limited by your jewels and how you spend them. And I think it's a pretty interesting take on worker placement. I haven't played many other games really that feel like this one does, especially at 4 players. And I'll continue to talk about that at the end of the video, but for now, the yellow player is collecting. They're getting a crown and some jewels for their workers that are out there. And this is an elite artisan, so once again, that one has to go back to the tavern. This worker here now can be sent out to another location. So they're going to look at their hand of gold cards and decide if they want to move that worker. Now they're saying, you know what, I'm tired of red collecting 2 crowns every turn. So let's go over to the 5. First, I have to spend 2 jewels to bump one of the red workers off back to the tavern. Now we can spend, a 4 and a 1 to move this worker over to the 5. And they're just trying to cut down on red's ability to get crowns. Now looking at the green player, they first check the tavern. There's nobody there. Nobody has bumped them off. They get to collect on this big 9 spot, which gives them 3 crowns, which is a huge turn. Now, once again, this is an elite artisan, so this worker has to go back to the tavern right away. But this other worker also gets to collect 2 jewels. So now they need to decide whether they want to move the other green worker that they haven't moved yet. Now they can't use the guy that's up in the tavern, but they can move this guy still. So they look at their gold cards, and whoa, look at that. We have another 9, and we do have 2 jewels. So they're going to go ahead and spend 2 jewels once again to play 3 cards, and that equals 9. So they can now send this guy up to the 9 space and force the other players to then spend jewels to bump them off. So this game, you're constantly trying to get the upper hand on your opponents, and it's just as much about forcing the other players to do things they don't want to do as it is about trying to do what you need to do to accomplish your goals and get those 10 crowns. Now, one thing I want to clarify real quick, remember how you can spend jewels to draw 2 extra cards? Let's just say we do that. So let's say I had 2 jewels, I spend them to the bank, and I draw 2 more cards on my turn. So now I have 6 cards in hand, but let's say I only play one of them. So for purposes of this example, let's just say I only play the 4 card and I move my worker to the 4. Now I have 5 cards in my hand. You still always end your turn with 4 cards. So you would actually have to discard a card at the end of your turn because you always end your turn with 4 cards. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit. And one more quick reminder, I touched on this earlier. Whenever you get 7 jewels in your possession, you must immediately spend them to get a crown. So you're never allowed to have more than 7 jewels, but you get a crown out of it. So I think I covered all the rules for Crowns for the King. Once again, I have the German edition, so this is the German rules translated to English. I believe if you have the English edition, the rulebook might be slightly different. So check Board Game Geek. I believe there's a thread on there explaining the differences between the German and English rules. I like the German rules. I think the board is tight and balanced. The game plays fine from my experience. So you can decide how you want to play the game. Crowns for the King gets a 7.5 out of 10 for me. That's way higher than the Board Game Geek rating. I believe it's at 5.5 out of 10 or something crazy. This is definitely better than that. Now, I understand some players aren't going to like the take that cutthroat nature of this game. I get that. And there's a little bit of luck in the card draws, but you can mitigate that by divvying out your numbers differently or spending jewels, so that doesn't bother me too much. My biggest complaint is the board lacks symbols for each location, so I had to go design and print these cover-up sheets. That was just a lot of work, and I will include the link in the description. If you have the German edition, you can print those out and put them on your board. They work fine. I just wish the original board had symbols on them. I don't know why they didn't do that. But as far as the gameplay itself, I think this is a very unique take on worker placement. It doesn't really play like any other worker placement game that I've ever played, especially regarding the order of operations, where you place a worker out and you don't immediately collect the goods from the spot. That's how most worker placement games play. You put your worker out and you get the stuff. This game, you have to invest money to put your worker out and then hope you're there still at the start of your next turn. Now, sometimes you can get trapped where other players will pay to bump you off, and you can't do anything about that. And that's a little bit of a frustration during the game, but the whole game is push and pull, fight for position, keep each other in check. And if you like that style of game, this might be one to check out. So it's not the best game ever, it's not a must own, but if you can find it for a good price and you watch this video, then you can make a judgment if it's worth getting or not. I found this game for like $10. I think it was well worth that. But again, it's not for everybody, so make sure you know what you're getting into here. There just wasn't a lot of content about this game on the internet, so I figured I would make this video. Hopefully help some of you decide if you want to play Crowns for the King. If you've ever played this game, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to click subscribe so we can continue to discover these undiscovered games together. And as always, thank you so much for joining us on the Undiscovered Games video podcast. We really appreciate you watching and listening from wherever you are in the world. If you want to help the channel, you can click subscribe and share this video with your friends. There's also a donate link in the description if you wish to support us. Any proceeds go toward making more videos like this and just better quality content in the future. We really have a passion for finding these undiscovered games and sharing them with you. Also, we have an Instagram page. If you're not familiar with that, go give us a follow on the IG. We are at undiscovered_games. We post a lot of cool pictures and written reviews over there as well. So thanks again for watching, and we will see you on the next one.